Hi, everyone. I'm Shelby Kang. I'm usually behind the scenes at all these events, but today I'm going to be moderating our end of day panel. So, this is going to be the last session of the day, and it includes Tyler Bishop, Carolyn Shelby, Sara Jerde, and Tyler Benedict. So, I'd like to invite our panelists to the stage.
A very slow applause.
So this panel is going to include our traditional town hall Q&A, but first we're going to get started on a couple of sections that we've carved out to get their thoughts on different topics and trends that are probably pretty pertinent to all the digital publishers here in this room. So panelists are all mic'd up and good to go?
Sure.
I think so. Yep.
All right. So our first section is What's Your Take? So we're going to cover 5 different topics or statements, and you can kind of agree or disagree or share some thoughts that you might have on that. And I know some of these are probably going to be more relevant to you than others. So if you don't really have anything to share, that's totally fine. You can go ahead and pass. So for our first topic, it's privacy and regulation. So currently a lot is going on with changes to cookie tracking and government regulations. So I think we'll start from left to right. So Tyler Benedict, what's your take on this?
So the first thing is I think somebody should invent an app that automatically clicks the box for me that says accept cookies, so I don't have to do it on every single website. It would save me minutes a day. Yeah, I don't know. We don't really collect or sell much data of any kind, and if we do, it's just email addresses for our list, and we make it pretty easy to unsubscribe, so I don't really have much opinion.
We have a whole department that does that, and that's not something that I fortunately have to worry about. I do know that in previous roles and just in general, we are collecting. We're doing way too many cookies. It slows your site down. It slows the internet down, and it's going. Whatever good was coming of it, we're ruining it because like this is why we can't have nice things. We're just too many cookies.
I think it's going to lead to a better relationship between readers and publishers. I think when readers know exactly what information you're giving to these news sites, they're going to be more comfortable giving that information up, which in turn will also just lead to better advertising because you know exactly what you've given them and what that ad might look like for you.
Yeah, I think Sarah nailed it. I think it puts publishers in a better position. So I think if we can look into the future, we're going to see a future potentially without any cookies. And that doesn't mean that advertisers are going to spend less money on digital. I think we're looking at a future where people are definitely still going to spend more money on digital. It still has better attribution than pretty much every other form of advertising. And so if you think about, put yourself in the shoes of an advertiser, you're putting your money into it. You want to buy quality inventory. You want to advertise to your audience. You can no longer throw all your money into Facebook or Google. Where do you go to get a quality audience? Well, the publishers are the ones that have those relationships. So I think this is a good thing for publishers.
How is that going to change the way, like Ezoic, for instance, sees what type of user is coming to our site and then shows the appropriate ad placements and sizes and all that if there's no cookies to track that?
So advertising isn't going to go away on the web. And so Ezoic doesn't track any cookies. Any data that we have is first party. And so the benefit is that all advertising is going to be, it basically levels the playing field. So if there's no cookies at all, no one can use them. And so there'll have to be something else. And that's what we're seeing right now is you're seeing bigger ad exchanges pivot into, we've got the next thing that's better than cookies, but is kind of the same thing. Or you've got Google rolled out their recent, whatever it is that they're talking about that's supposed to be really great and better than contextual targeting. But let's just pretend it's contextual targeting. Everybody's going to have to play by the same rules. So yeah, I think ultimately it's good for publishers because I think it makes advertisers have to be more specific about what inventory they buy.
All right, our next topic is mobile, which is more prevalent than ever. Time spent on mobile is increasing. More and more media is being consumed on mobile. So starting again, Tyler Benedict, what's your take on that?
I know we probably need to improve our mobile site. Unfortunately, not being a developer and being a pretty lean staff, I have not had a chance to really dive into it. So I would love to.
You have a bad mobile
What?
site?
I mean, we have a site with our WordPress theme that does something with mobile that's slightly different than our desktop.
You're hurting me.
Sorry. Help me.
Carolyn, you have some thoughts to share, it sounds like.
Mobile first is very important. You know, Google went to the mobile first index. They're looking at your mobile site for what the content that's visible on your mobile site is what's being used for your relevancy. So you should kind of make sure that's good.
Well, it's all the same content. It's just
Okay.
laid out slightly differently.
Okay.
Like we're not missing anything on mobile.
Are you sure like your tap targets are the right size and stuff like that? We'll talk.
I
We'll
get
talk.
alerts every once in a while.
You know, I have a lot of colleagues that believe progressive web apps are the way to go. I know a lot of people that are just really offended and against AMP. As a publisher, AMP's been great for us. And I haven't been at a content site where AMP wasn't great for us, but that's specifically with news. So if you're not using it for, you know, the news aspect of it and to get into like those top stories, I don't know that it's as necessary. If you can be ultra fast and you have the opportunity to do something like a progressive web app where you don't have to worry about flipping people back and forth between a native app and the web, I kind of feel like that's going to be the way to go, because we don't want to, once you get someone into a native app though, it's great. You have all kinds of control and it's beautiful. But sometimes it's hard to get people to commit to downloading that, and then you've got to keep it uploaded. You know, I feel like maybe the PWA is going to be, you know, the way to go if you're really abhorrently against AMP. A progressive web app. So it acts like an app, but it's on the web. Lots of people are. There's lots of sites that are
BMW is using it.
Yeah. It's a little different. Not entirely. You can talk.
Yeah, I have an impression, I may be wrong. Google's trying to promote or push progressive web apps, but it's not really picking up.
I don't think Google is pushing progressive web apps. I would say just in general, it's a trend on the web that they have developer guidelines around. I think they're supportive of it, but I wouldn't say that they're pushing it. I'm surprised that it hasn't taken off more, but
I feel like with so much of the web on WordPress that like if WordPress adopts it, it'll take off. And until they do, people are just, they're waiting till the plugins come out. They're waiting till the WordPress updates happen, and they're just kind of relying on that. It is a lot of development. And if you don't have the resources to dedicate to all that new development, you've got the rest of your business to run. So I don't know that it's something you need to jump on today, but I kind of see things going that way going forward. Not immediately, but maybe eventually.
Sara, do you have any thoughts to share?
Just in thinking about the native app versus the PWA, I think it's important to think about the reader experience, and especially if you're coming from a social platform where you're going to be routed. And so if you have an audience that's going to come to you in your native app, if you have a lot of direct traffic, then maybe consider that option. But I think both are great reader experiences.
if you're a publisher, there's probably a really good chance that you've tried AMP, and then you probably feel however you feel about it. I'll leave it at that. We're in a very nice office here, and I want to make sure that I am allowed to do great events like this. That being said, I think when you look at emerging mobile trends, when you look at things like AMP and the different frameworks, you know, we keep rolling in more and more aspects of, you know, HTML, JavaScript. When you make all these additions, the framework gets more and more bloated. I don't know that we're going to be worried about internet speed in 10 years. And so I don't know that it's as necessary. That said, native apps, I feel like, are a little bit like subscriptions, which Sara was talking a little bit earlier. There's a finite a number of apps that you really want to interface with on a regular basis. So unless you feel like with your audience, you can become one of those limited ones, then something like a progressive web app, like Carolyn said, whenever it becomes more, I guess, accessible or available to publishers as a whole, it probably is going to not make as much sense, but you get all the features of an app, being able to do push notifications, have people save it to a phone without having to invest in the development and maintenance costs of an app. So I think there's a lot of great benefits for publishers to use it. It's just, yeah, like it hasn't caught on the same way yet.
All right, so our next topic is going beyond just written content. Voice is a hot buzzword right now, and it feels like everybody, and I'm included in this, has their own podcast nowadays. We're gonna reverse Uno card this, and we'll start on Tyler Bishop's. Tyler, what's your take on this?
Yeah, Hot Ones is one of my favorite shows. I mentioned this yesterday. I think it's funny that it became like it started off as sort of a low budget interview YouTube show, and now I saw the other day that MTV has a primetime show that's basically an exact rip off of it, and so you can see legacy publishers trying to steal these ideas that you see. Basically, independent, smaller publishers are able to tap into an audience, find something that they're rabid about. Mac Observer was talking about it yesterday with podcasts. I think it's a really great opportunity to find your audience in a place that maybe no one else has yet. Serial, you can see there's this huge increase in the number of all podcasts that people listen to after the original Serial launch. It kind of got people into it. And so I think that if you want to look at like green space in digital publishing, it's on a lot of these emerging places with the audiences that you're probably already in touch with.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to expand it in new categories. I mean, think of all of the true crime documentaries and podcasts that have come after the success of Serial. The New York Times launched The Daily, which was its first daily news podcast, right after the 2016 inauguration, and it just hit 1 billion downloads. And now they have a whole team dedicated to audio. So it's a really interesting place to expand, as well as voice. I mean, as consumers get more comfortable interacting with the devices in this way, think of all the opportunities publishers can interact with listeners. Whether that's, hey, give me the forecast this morning, and that's provided to you from your local newspaper, or what's on tap this week in the news. Places like the NPR and Washington Post are already in this space, and there's a lot of wide open opportunities there.
I think anytime you can diversify your digital assets, you're gonna come out ahead. You can't put all your eggs in one basket. So, you know, get on board.
I have a lot of thoughts on this. My overriding philosophy is with this, like if you can't, if you're going to go into one of these things that's not like, let's say we're all just digital publishing written stuff right now, and we think, oh, podcasts are super hot. We need a podcast. Oh, and people are blowing up on YouTube. We need to be doing video. Video is the next big thing. That's great, but if you just go into it, A, without a strategy, and B, without some way of differentiating yourself from somebody that's already doing it, because podcasts are so hot, everybody's got a podcast. Because video is blowing up, everybody's trying to do video, and we're still figuring out our video strategy out. We do have a BikeRumor podcast that we just launched earlier this year, and it was a way for us to do something different for our audience. So with BikeRumor's written content, it's just tech product, very product centric. Here's all the shiny new things. With the podcast, what we wanted to do is actually like start talking to the people behind those things a little bit more, and a little bit more personality driven. And it was something that wasn't really being done on a cycling specific podcast. So we had to do something different, because also nobody wants to hear us just rambling on about shiny things, because it's a very visual type of thing. So a podcast wouldn't work. With the video, I was talking to somebody earlier. So when BikeRumor started, The reason I did this is because I saw an opportunity. This was 2008. Most of the cycling magazines, the print magazines, didn't even have a website, and if they did, it was a landing page to get you to subscribe to their print magazine. So I was a big fan of Engadget, the tech blog, and there was nothing like that format of all the new things just rapid fire in the bike space. So we did that because it was different. Over the years, people have mimicked that format, and now what made us special then isn't making us special now. And so we're trying to evolve our content with some of the different things I showed you earlier. With video, we have a competitor that has already 1.7 million subscribers on YouTube for one of their channels. They have 2 or 3 other channels that are very close to that number. So to try and do what they're doing with video, like we're starting with I think we have 7,000 subscribers for the BikeRumor YouTube channel. Like we can't go do what they're doing. So we're coming up with other strategies to have a different way of storytelling or different themed programs on our channel, and of course the Where to Ride videos. And so what I would caution is, yes, it's exciting to jump into these new things, but if you are just trying to do the same stuff that's been done, forget about it, because there's already somebody doing it better than you. You have to figure out what you can do better than anybody else.
All right, moving on to Gen Z, which is the largest cohort out there. So digital publishers are going to have to increasingly get their content in front of this audience as time goes on. So maybe starting with Tyler Benedict, do you have any thoughts to share on that?
Hang on, I'm reading all this stuff. So going back to our video strategy, there are some things I can be in front of the camera for BikeRumor, some of the tech talk and talking about the places we ride. But some of these other series that we're planning, I know full well one of them really needs a 20-something female person in front of the camera. The other one probably needs a 20 to 30-year-old, whatever, it doesn't matter for that particular series. And it's largely because, I'm 45. A lot of my other riders are in their mid 30s now to 40s. I have a couple of younger ones, but for us to kind of visually relate, or for people to relate visually to us, I know I need people that are going to in Gen Z or thereabouts to be the new face of BikeRumor coming up, because my audience started with me, they're aging up. Well, that's great, but now there's this big audience down here that's not coming up with us, that are finding other things. So yeah, so there's just, as far as that is, we need to have fresh faces on our site that relate to that, speak that language. And yeah.
I think that as a company, they're already looking at how they're going to capture that. And I don't think just digital is going to be, and I can't speak to it really because I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty positive that capturing younger sports fans is already something that people with a much higher pay grade than I have are working on diligently. So I'm, yeah, I got nothing.
Raise your hands if you've ever spent time on TikTok. I'm just curious. Yeah.
It looks horrifying.
It's scary out there. Yeah. I'm from the Vine generation, and I will say, and I'll date myself and I'll feel 87 saying this, but TikTok, I just don't understand it. I don't get what they're trying to do there. I mean, I don't get the humor at all. And obviously I'm not the audience for this. But I'm also demographically considered a millennial, not that far away from Gen Z. So the rate in which consumer habits are changing is so fast that it's difficult to keep up. But excited to see what publishers have coming, because it's an exciting generation who has grown up with the internet. So there's a lot to do there.
Yeah, so I've been exposed to TikTok as well, and I have the exact same response. I also am from the Vine generation, so I could totally relate. I feel like there's all these things that whenever I was a kid, my parents would always be like, "That's stupid," and I would be like, "I know it is," and that's what was attractive to me about it. And I feel like there's something going on there with TikTok, but it just goes to show it's not for me. I don't get it. If I was a publisher, it would make no sense for me to have a TikTok strategy unless somebody that really did get it was running that. And so I think it's important to understand you don't have to participate in everything that's out there, like Tyler was talking about. I do think that there are Generation Z, millennial, whatever segment that you want to draw, there's a segment of that audience that there probably is some way for you to relate to them that makes sense for you. But I'm a big believer in focusing on your strengths, unless you can have somebody that you partner with or something like that, or acquire something along those lines that really does get this.
I would just say too, while we're on the topic of TikTok, the Washington Post has a really good TikTok account, and it's not related to the hard news that they do at all. It's complete humor, but they go throughout the newsroom and kind of in a funny way explain what everyone does, which is great service journalism when you think about it. So if you're interested in this space at all, I would definitely check out the Washington Post on TikTok.
Yeah, I'd say the other risk of not understanding it and trying to do it is that you just look like a jackass. And
All right, our last What's Your Take topic is owned commerce. A lot of media companies are kind of capitalizing on this opportunity to sell branded content, or sorry, branded products. So I think starting Tyler Bishop, yeah, what's your take on this?
So I've heard a lot of publishers today talk about affiliate revenue, and I know that Amazon is a very dominant player in that space. I will say that I've interacted before with publishers where they happen to be pulling a large percentage of their affiliate revenue from one particular offering or one particular vertical, and in those in those situations, I think it makes a lot of sense to look at what would a white label, like self-owned product or owned commerce model, look like for us, and how could we implement that. So I think that that's worth taking a look at. I will say that I think that it's a classic folly for organizations that are not software companies to try to pivot into software. Not that it hasn't worked before, but having worked in the software space for a long time, there are far more sad stories than success ones. But I do think that the product model has a place for certain publishers in certain situations, but it's a classic. It depends.
Yeah, I completely agree. In the case of Tasty, that's a BuzzFeed brand, and they went and licensed their IP to produce that ice cream, and they have a whole line of cookware too, based around that IP. I think it's not going to work for everyone. Cosmopolitan also just came out with a perfume. So I think when you talk to consumers about what they want and what a media brand looks like for them, I mean, does it mean that you're in the dairy aisle, and does it mean that you're in Ulta stores? So I don't think it's going to work for everyone, but an interesting play there for those who do.
I think it's related to your brand. You know, if you've got a brand that can translate to it and you've got a following that will follow it, you can do it. But otherwise, it's one of those things I don't think you can force. It's really going to depend on. It depends.
yeah, I would agree. That's exactly what I was going to say. Other than starting with, it also sounds like a lot of work, like because you have to print whatever it is. If you're doing like, if I were going to try and sell BikeRumor t-shirts or something.
Pedals or anything.
No, nobody wants that. We actually, that was one of the questions on our last reader survey a couple years ago, was, hey, if we made some sick BikeRumor t-shirts, would you buy them? And there was not a single yes. So, but that said, there are some of our competitors who have a much more of a personality built into their site, and they do sell a lot of merch, you know, but it's not something we can do. So that kind of plays into yours, right? Like you have to know your audience and know whether or not your brand or your outlet has the personality to drive sales and stuff. We also looked at doing, and this is just one of those things where it came down to lack of bandwidth on our part, but you know, working with a bicycle component brand to do like a limited edition color of something. So there's different creative ways of thinking about it, and I think something like that could work. We just didn't have the time to manage that program. But yeah,
Just sound like a lot.
it's a ton of work. And then too, like, what happens if you order a bunch of t-shirts and coffee mugs and nobody buys them? Then what are you gonna do? You know, give it to Goodwill.
Give them away to Christmas presents.
Year after year after
This is why my family doesn't talk to me.
year.
All right, our next section is rapid fire thumbs up or thumbs down. So I'm going to present a statement, and you can either agree or disagree with thumbs up or thumbs down. You're also welcome to share a short remark. So up first, SEO is getting more complicated. Agree or disagree?
Mm, mm.
I don't think that it's getting more complicated. I also don't think that it's getting less complicated. Google's pretty consistent about the things that they communicate. Carolyn?
I the the fundamentals haven't changed.
Right.
You know, if you're gaming the system and you're trying to exploit loopholes, then yeah, I suppose it is getting more complicated because it's like playing whack-a-mole. You do something sneaky and Google whacks you. But if you're being clear with your communications and you have a good message and your message is clear and you're adhering to the fundamentals and your site is technically sound, nothing about that has changed since the beginning. So I don't think conceptually or in theory it's any more complicated than it was before. You just have to remember that when you're presented with a shiny new blinky object, you have to evaluate it in terms of, is this crawlable? Is this good for my user? Is this violating the terms of service? Is this being naughty? You know, if it's not, you just have to consider, is it bad or is it not? If it's not bad, then implement it. You know, it's not any more complicated, I don't think.
Do you think you're able to have more substantial and productive conversations because more people recognize the importance of it now?
Oh yeah, for sure. You know, just not having to pay for the traffic for organic, or people are very very interested in why is my brand not at the top? Why is that brand beating us? And it's like, okay, well, let's look at your website. Let's look at what you're doing. And they're open to it now. Whereas, back in the day when I was getting started, my parents were still telling me, you go back to school or you're never gonna, this is a fad. Internet's not gonna last. You're gonna be unemployed. Back then, companies were like, why would I spend money on that? This is a fad. This isn't gonna last. But now we're
We love
all
print ads.
yeah, now we're all pretty sure it's not a fad and it's gonna last, and it's something that people are concerned about.
All right, next up, it's going to get harder to make money off of content. Ooh, is that a unanimous?
Ah,
No.
Carolyn.
And I don't know.
Okay, that's fair
Ooh,
enough.
classic sideways.
Yeah.
I think you're going to have to get more creative because it's like everything else. If you're trying to do the same thing as everybody else, like, I mean, not that people hopefully are going to steal our ideas, but like if all the other cycling media tried to offer the same thing that we're offering, right? Like it's going to dilute that to the point where now we got to come up with something new. And so it's got to be, again, it's got to drive value, but it's got to be original.
Well, you don't really make the money off of content though. You're making the money off of the users. You're making the money off of the eyeballs. It's not the content that's producing. Like if we could all just write content and have it magically, fart out cash, that would be magnificent, but that's not. It's the users that are coming. So is it getting harder to get people to your website and getting someone to pay money for having their brand exposed to them? And I think that the, banner blindness, cookies, how the ads are being executed, people's desire to reduce the number of ads, be to make their sites faster or to please their users. I think the opportunities for the in your face traditional banner type ads might be changing as we go forward. Does that make sense?
I see content as the product for a publisher. So, in the same way we were talking earlier about different revenue models and things like that, I think that you're basically just trying to figure out what is the way that I want people to try to pay for my product, which is my content. And I think we're in this unique scenario now where we've had some very dominant parties that dictate to digital publishers exactly what they can and what they can't do as it relates to how they monetize their content. And I see the security and the cookies thing is this break free where all of a sudden we're going to get the wild west maybe again, where everybody's going to compete for the new version of targeting that's going to be dominant. And I think if publishers truly take the time to sit that out, I think that there's value here for publishers. I think it's better actually the fewer parties that actually get to wield what the type of targeting looks like for the future.
And I would just say too, high quality content is going to attract those eyeballs, those advertisers who want to be next to it, and the brands who want to sign on to your events. So I think as long as you have high quality content, you're going to have the readership that you want.
I'll mention too real quick that the donation model, like things like
Patreon.
yeah, yeah, being able to make money off of donations. I don't think 10 years ago there were publications or publishers thinking about like maybe a donation model would work, or maybe that's plays a role in some amount of revenue that we're going to be able to take from this. But it exists today, and I think that just more opportunities, more tools is good.
All right. Our next one is in 5 years, Google will lose market share in search and advertising. Thumbs up or thumbs down? No one wants to put their
You know,
thumbs.
we're not mind readers. So
All right. I think Tyler's going to be the only one who wants to share on this.
Yeah, so I'll make up for my AMP comments earlier. I think Google's going to be just fine. So seems like there's a political wind that's kind of in not facing the larger platforms right now. I don't expect that to cause any major changes. And I don't know. I'm not a fortune teller. I'm not a psychic either. But if you made me put money on it, I would say there's not going to be a major shift as it relates to antitrust or anything like that that's going to cause a major shift across any of the major platforms in the next 5 years.
but something could pop up. I mean, we weren't expecting Google, right? So
Anything could happen on the internet.
yeah, I
You
mean,
can't place bets, I think.
who knows?
That can be a t-shirt that I bet we could sell. Anything can happen on the internet.
All right. Our next one is branded content shows the most potential for growth. Thumbs up or thumbs down? Oh, mixed bag.
Well, so I would want to see how people define branded content, right? Like, is it the crappy examples I showed first, or is it the other stuff we do first? Like, it's when I think branded content, I don't immediately think of like a reader survey contest or like an ask a stupid question type back and forth, but it's clearly branded when a brand sponsors it, but it's not like Pivot Bicycles tells you why their suspension design is the best. Like that's like crappy branded content. But for us, like as much as I hate to say, I don't see our traffic growing exponentially over the next 5 years. I don't see our traffic growing that much, but I do see the number of kind of co-branded opportunities growing. And so we're still going to have the same number of page views, but the content that we produce is kind of unlimited, right? Like page views means I have a finite number of ads I can serve, but the content side of it is, okay, how much content can I produce? And so for us, that's a tremendous room for growth.
I think when I think of branded content, I'm thinking of the, you know, Fufu Nut Emporium sponsors why Fufu Nuts are the healthiest thing you can possibly put in your face, and then tries to run it on a site that makes it look like it's legitimate news. And I think with all the concern over fake news that and people are getting savvy. They're starting to identify and know that, this isn't real. This is sponsored. Oh, I bet they're making money off of this. And I know the prices that the newspapers and magazines were charging for some of that branded content, especially if they were going to try to slide it in as real news, were just prohibitively expensive. And I just don't see I feel like that's going to come crashing down. Like I can't see people paying for I it's one thing if you reasonably expect to fool the consumers, but I think the consumers know, and I think there's this backlash brewing against it because of the fake news.
I agree. And that kind of stuff I don't see lasting, and it's probably already dying. Like I see less of that kind of stuff in the bike space on competing websites. Whereas, 5 years ago, there was quite a bit of that kind of junk, which is why we took so long to figure out how we were going to do it. So yeah, that's bad branded content. And yeah, I don't see that stuff surviving very much longer at all.
All right. Our last one is the average publisher with a mobile app now sends over 121 push notifications per month. Thumbs up or thumbs down?
Sounds
Wait, are you
horribly
asking if
annoying.
it's true or I mean, is this
Oh,
a
I
true
mean,
or
it's
false?
kind of one of those things that's like, do you agree with
Oh, the
how many they're
frequency?
doing, push notifications in general?
So do you think we should or they should send this many? Is that
Yeah,
right?
something along those lines.
I feel like that depends on your like what if it's you are legitimately breaking that many stories kind of thing, I but if it's who do I get email from every day? Neiman Marcus sends me email every day. This $10,000 gown would look great on you. You should buy that. Literally, I get 3 of those a day. And I'm like, how many parties do you think I go to?
Expedia or Priceline, one of the two is the worst because they're like urgent. And I'm like, man, whoever did that email marketing thing, like, come on, guys.
Well, at some
Give
point,
it a break.
My girlfriend uses this app in New York City, like every hour that we're sitting watching TV, about a crime that's and it's nonstop.
Doesn't that make you crazy?
Yeah,
Doesn't it make you feel unsafe?
I think it's really important to have that. I think that it's really important for publishers to have a direct relationship with their audience. It's up to you to have the responsibility to know what frequency they want that communication. Otherwise, I mean, it's like any privilege that you have. If you use it too much, you'll lose it.
Yeah.
Well, you could probably give options too. Like I know sometimes when I try and unsubscribe from something, well, what if we just sent you one thing a week? Like, no. But you can give them options.
You had your
right? Some
chance.
people,
Too
some
late,
people
go
want that,
away.
right?
All right. So now it's time for our town hall questions. So if you'd like to ask a question, we're going to have you actually line up at these 2 microphones. It's currently 4:10, so we can go until 4:30. We're going to try and answer as many questions as possible. So if you could try and limit yourself to 1 at a time, and just be courteous to our panelists and other guests.
Can I abuse my power with the mic and start with a question?
Yeah, let's hear it.
Okay, so this is it's kind of a series of questions about mainly like the H1, H2, H3 thing. So with a WordPress blog, you said you don't want a bunch of H1 headlines on a page, but like the nature of a blog is a headline story.
Well,
Like,
so
is that
and when I say it depends on the context and it's very specific applications. If it's a page where it's an aggregation with excerpts of each headline is related to an excerpt of a blog, that's fine. That's not going to confuse things. But on your individual story page, would you still have 17 H1s?
no?
Right, because that's the one that you really need that clarity on.
Okay.
So don't have 17 on that one.
And then how do you recommend using like H2 and H3s along within the story to kind of break it up into sections?
It's literally supposed to break down like an outline. So your H2s are supposed to support your H1. So they're supposed to be nested underneath it. The H3s are supposed to, in theory, support an H2. So they should be nested underneath that. That is the proper way to do it. Do you have to do it? No. You could have one H1 at the top and then H3s for your subsections, or you could not have any at all. And whatever. They claim that it's not that big of a deal, but I do know that as far as news go, headlines still really should be the H1. Does that help?
Yeah. And I think just as a side note, I think what I've found too is like putting those in, whereas if it's a super long article in particular, having those little headlines kind of like pulls people down just a little more and
The
then pulls them down
subheader-
and it just
because
it keeps people reading.
people scan,
Yeah.
and your eye doesn't like a 10-mile long block of text. Your eye likes the visual, you don't realize that your eye is getting tense, but when you're focusing on the little content, your eye relaxes a little when it hits a subheader, and you want to make people comfortable because people don't like to be uncomfortable.
Right.
So it's all, you gotta have some empathy for the user and try to make the experience as frictionless as possible.
Okay, one more, and I think this will hopefully benefit a lot of people is, like somebody mentioned an Oktoberfest article for travel, and we've got some very evergreen articles that are years old and still some of our top performing stories. When you want to update that, you said, don't write a new one because you have all this, traffic going to this old one. How do you bring that old one back to the front? Like on WordPress, I can't republish that with a new date because I would lose all my backlinks. How do you bring that old story once you've tuned it up back to the front of your site without breaking links?
There's a way to do it. I'd have to think about it. No, it would be in the code, and it would be a very there's a way to do it. I just don't have it off the top of my head. So no, if you change a slug, you're changing the URL. So don't change the URL is the gist of it. That wouldn't change the slug though. So as long as the slug is the same, it's still technically the same article. Right, but he wants it to pop up in the the list or like on the homepage. So you could you would have to well, so if you 301 it, you're 301ing it to a new URL. And that would work, but a 301 isn't a true one-to-one transfer of value. There's pennies on the dollar loss as far as, if you're that concerned about it. If you're not that concerned about pennies on the dollar loss of value, then you could make a new article and just 301 the old one to the new one. That would probably be the easiest thing to do.
Reverse chronological order, go up all the content on the homepage, and once you update it, you can republish, change something within the content, and you click on publish, you will actually appear on your homepage.
It will, but all the old.
On the homepage.
No, well, the fresh date's not going to help. But if you do that, all your old content's going to surface. I would actually probably.
Necessarily, we do all the time the technical side set up on a homepage with a ref on, and then the top slot is being pinned, whatever we want for it to sit there, whatever old content we're updating. Once we update, we don't change the date or anything. Something we go online and we do publish, and it appears on the homepage.
I remember how I've done this before. No, I remember how I've done this before. I set up a special tag because there's a variable you can use that will call. You can have a section of like a top section of your homepage, and it'll say which category do you want us to use or which tag do you want us to use. I had a tag called featured, and I'd only assign it to one, so that would be the one that would pop up. And then when it didn't want it to be featured anymore, I'd just take the featured tag off of it, and it would disappear. That's how you do it.
Okay.
All right. We're gonna start on this side of the room. Leland, what's your question?
All right, Caroline, you talked about sponsored content and no following pages and whatnot. So when it comes to like, say I have a sponsored content article from Microsoft or something like that, they came in, they wanted to do a sponsored article with us. Should that page be no follow, no index, no follow, or?
So technically, I believe the link to that article from another page is supposed to be no followed.
Mhm.
And are you a news publisher?
We do mix of news and evergreen.
So did you publish it as a news article?
Probably not.
Okay. So as long as there's no danger of it accidentally showing up in your news sitemap XML,
Mhm.
and as long as it hasn't accidentally been ingested into Google News, you're probably okay allowing it to stay indexed. Where they get irritated is if you've got sponsored content polluting your news feed.
Mhm.
That news that you're feeding to them, they will get super angry. So don't let that happen. As long as that hasn't happened, you're perfectly within your rights, I think, to let it remain indexed. But as far as I know, you are supposed to disclose that it's sponsored. And now, because we've got the new rel attribute, the link to it from other pages. So as that link appears like in your sidebar or wherever, should have the rel sponsored attribute in that link. Okay.
So just a quick follow-up on that. If it was a republished article, like it was an article that was on the sponsor's page, and then we published it and we do a canonical link back to the original article and it's still sponsored, not in the news, is that kind of selling links because the link just kind of goes back to the original? And would that be something that could be potentially penalized by Google?
So
Wouldn't it be great if there's like an intercom and they were like, no?
So here's the deal. They've never said you can't do that. But as far as I can tell, it's basically the same as selling links. But they've never said you can't do it. So I guess it's still okay.
That's the corner that I'm packed into because
But I
it's
feel
like
like it's
I'm
still
afraid that
selling
that's going to
links.
happen, and we're gonna.
Well, no, I will. No, I won't say that. It's complicated, but they have no official position on that.
Mhm.
So I would go with, speaking as I'm not a lawyer, but I pretend to be one on the internet. I would keep doing what you're doing, but if you get penalized, my defense, if I were you, would be I have no resources or references that specify that this is a violation of your terms of service. That being said, I'm very, very sorry. Please forgive me. I will fix it for you. And that should take care of it.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, we're going to move on to the other side of the room. John, do you have a question?
Yeah. Also, this is for Carolyn. It's very similar to that. I publish press releases from various companies. Now, I don't charge any money for that, and it's pretty much the same as would be found on other websites. Should that be treated as no index, no follow to them as well? It links back to, let's say, the brand that we're somehow featuring.
Are you a news publisher?
No, nothing to do with Google News. Just
okay. Then if they didn't pay you for it and there was no consideration, you're probably fine.
so just index it, and there's not an issue because it might be on 10 other sites within the.
Well, no, where
article?
you're going to run into an issue with that is they might recognize a different site as being the original source, and you might not get included in the index at all. So
I'm not worried about that. I do this more just for our email
Yeah.
readers and our
Yeah, yeah,
audience
yeah.
likes the stuff, right?
I don't necessarily think you're doing anything wrong. Now, if someone accuses you of taking compensation for that and you get penalized, your defense then would be, and again, I'm not a lawyer, I'm just pretending to be one on the internet. I literally took no money for this. I swear to God,
Right.
please forgive me.
Yeah.
Also, I will take this down and do whatever you want me to. That would be your defense to get back in their good graces. But I don't think you're doing anything wrong. If you're literally not taking any money for it and you're not getting anything in exchange, you're just doing it for information. That is, basically the way God intended, and via con Dios.
Okay. so just index it and do
Yeah,
follow or
yeah.
okay. Thanks.
Good.
I'd say you're probably also missing a great opportunity to, like tweak it and put it in your own words in a way that gives it just your own little spin on it and stuff, and create some original content that is more search friendly and helps position you guys as a little bit more of an expert on something.
And that's what a press release really is for. I mean, it's not meant to, people never sent them out back in like the print solo days, or when print was the only thing. You didn't send press releases out and expect it not to get changed. It was like a seed, a starter.
Right.
And then the journalists would take it and they'd zhush it and they'd make it, good for their publication, and then they'd print it. It was never meant to be just printed as is, especially because they're usually written kind of in a markety kind of way, and it's not very newsy.
The business journals all disagree with you.
But the other cool thing is, if you're rewriting it, you can help put it into context by linking to other stuff you've written about that brand or that topic in the past, and so you're keeping people checking on other things that you've written.
I used to do that. Used to rewrite everything, and for those reasons. But I mean, it never really attracted much search traffic, so it was a lot of work for really nothing. So I was just, I don't know, just copy and paste it, put it in there.
I post press releases all the time. Most of them have text, and I get lots of traffic.
Are you in Google News?
Not yet.
Are you marking them as press releases? Because there's a special marking demarcation thing for press releases.
I say.
My friend.
I source it as.
Yeah, there actually is like a little meta tag you're supposed to put for press releases.
All right.
I got to show you how to get into the Google News publisher's dashboard.
We've got one question over here on this side.
I thank you all for your answers. With Google taking more of the real estate on both the desktop and the mobile, I'm sure for the World Series, they're serving up the scores versus ESPN. How do you compete with that? And also, is there a way that you are trying to optimize for featured snippets?
So for most sports related queries, there's it usually pops a news carousel. So that's really where we're trying to stay above the fold and stay prominent, is by getting into those the top news carousels or the video carousels. I mean, we're really diversifying. All of our assets aren't just text. So we've got the video assets, we've got Instagram stories, things like that, to try to help stay in front of it. As far as featured snippets goes, I've only been there a year. I got a roadmap. Give me some more time.
I would say one of the things I think to think about as a digital publisher is that the time of being able to publish scores or really simple information like what's the weather going to be like today or something like that, that's a commodity in that it's the same thing as gasoline. If gasoline is cheaper or easier across the street, and it's then that's where I'm going to go because there's nothing overly unique about it. So I think we were looking at the podcast, the video space earlier. I think regardless of the platform, what you see is the publishers that are really growing. They're coming out of nowhere, but part of the reason why is they're doing something different. They're relating to our audience in a different way. All the publishers that were at the roundtable yesterday, this was the thing they talked about in terms of one of their greatest fears is that the audience would pivot away from them. They'd lose kind of that connection to their audience somehow. And I think that that's the right attitude to have from the standpoint of not how do I make sure that Google or anyone, how do I make sure I'm not disrupted from this, basically savvy business idea that I had of, I'm going to be the first one that puts all the hockey scores on the internet or something like that when they come out, to being how do I relate and connect to an audience and actually provide value to somebody as opposed to just trying to insert myself as a middleman.
Thank you.
All right, we've got another question over here.
We recently seen Google sort out smaller sites or small sites for searches on health and financial topics, right? With this whole EAT thing. Do you see this expanding into other topics as well? And if so, what should we do as publishers to establish EAT to increase our chances of ranking in the future?
So I'll let Carolyn get into the EAT stuff because she probably has some interesting insights there. I will say this though, this premise. So health is kind of a unique vertical, but I would say one of the things we looked into a long time ago as a part of a larger study was our large domain, high domain authority, quote unquote, sites are branded enterprise level publishers. Are they basically taking up more and more real estate inside of search than smaller publishers? And what we found is the exact opposite, which is if you look at year over year growth, on average, brands are growing slower. They're seeing less share. They're actually decreasing organic traffic in a lot of cases for a lot of different reasons. But on average, you're seeing more and more, I guess, smaller to medium-sized publishers dominating results. And I actually think that that's probably by design and probably something that Google likes and would like to keep. Again, if there's an editor comment in here and they're overhearing this and they want to agree, that's great. But generally, that's been our take for a long time, is it seems like that's the trend.
Yeah, it's just one comment. I'm just talking mostly about, we see some sites just getting hammered, going from 100,000 page view to 5,000 page views. I know a couple of guys that happened to.
That health vertical is pretty heavy. It's been one of the most dramatic ones, right?
Yeah.
Especially in the health vertical, with your money or your life types of sites, they want to know that the people publishing information are qualified to be making the statements that they're making. So anything you can do to illustrate that the people or the company responsible for putting out the information is qualified to do so is going to help you. So if you have let's say you sell CBD oil or something like that. I know that's a growing area. Let's say you have a licensed in multiple states pharmacist on staff who's, maybe on the management team, making sure that you have links to their certifications, links to verifiable, this is where he's board certified, this is the college he went to, this is where he's got, he's licensed here and you can check it with the state. He's licensed here and you can check it with the state. So there's those interconnections that are giving you not just social validation, but legitimate legal validation that this person is qualified, and then associate that person with, it's not just our company does this and our company does that. This is what the product does. And then a quote from Dr. whoever it is, right? And you attribute the quote with a link back to their profile, which then has links to all of their accreditations. Anything you can do to make it easy for them to see that you are qualified to make these statements. They just don't want quacks out there. Because who wants to be responsible for somebody getting some bad information on the internet and then having some sort of horrible medical outcome? It's really, it's the kindest thing to do for the consumer, is to try to protect them from quacks that are trying to sell them snake oil.
All right, we have time for one last question over here.
guys. So my question is like, is it necessary to optimize your top performing content regular basis? Because now what happening, like if you're having a top performing content and if your other higher authority site is writing similar kind of content, they could recreate that content, then there are high chances that you're going to get your ranking maybe get down. So what do you think about that?
So you've got high ranking content, but you've got a competitor who's writing the same kind of content, and
Yes,
you're
absolutely.
okay. In theory, your high ranking content would also be naturally acquiring powerful backlinks,
Yeah.
even if that's just from within your own site. So if you're writing other content that references this, this topic, you've got, and we didn't even talk about this much at all today, internal self-referential citations are big, and you can control the anchor text on those. I'm sure that you guys have heard that overzealous optimization of anchor text when you're backlink building will hurt you. It doesn't count if it's from within your own site. You could be super overzealous when it's your own content. So if you have a high performing article about pink jujubes, you write articles about other colored jujubes, but you mention, and they differ from pink jujubes in the way that, and then when you say pink jujubes, you link back to that article because that's your canonical authority article on pink jujubes. That's going to help you with not only continuing to expose that, continuing to build links to it, continuing to create the message that you're sending to Google that this is the page that I want to rank well. Should you update it periodically? Yeah, if there's new information, absolutely. Should you refresh it when you can? New images, maybe a study, something like that. Absolutely. It's like a garden. You got to tend to it because your competitors are trying to grow superfruit too.
It's happening a lot because if we are trying to create it's like optimize that content. If there is not enough information available, then that will be a problem. Like if the competitors are going to produce another kind of a content and add some more information, still they are going to get a more value. But if the internal linking is like, as you said, like if you're going from the internal links, that's great. Yeah.
Well, and that's why you need to be conscious of where your deep wells of authority are and make sure that you're throwing value from that deep well of authority. If it's your homepage, so it's usually your homepage, you would have a prominent link from your homepage to that page, the page that you're trying to promote, right? That's the fastest way to inject value over that way. But your competitor's probably doing the same thing, and he might get a bump temporarily just because he's new, but that doesn't mean it's going to stay. So don't panic just because he's overtaken you for a week. Wait to see if that's sticking, because it could be a blip. That's why I said, if you're checking things daily, you're gonna kill yourself with worry. Just keep an eye on it. If you fall a couple places and it sticks, then go back and figure out, what did they do? What are they doing differently? What can I do better? And there's always little tweaks you can make.
Thank you.
So I read this on the internet somewhere. That the flip side of what you said is you have this great reference piece that has a ton of traffic and backlinks coming to it. And when you write something new, reference it. The other thing is go back into that one and reference the new stuff you just wrote. So take this one that has a lot of power already and use some of that power to send people to your other content.
You can do that. You just have to make sure that you're not cannibalizing the anchor text that belongs to something else. So, like, here's an example. So let's say I'm a medical publisher and I write a lot of articles about scoliosis. I still only have one article that is like the general overview page for scoliosis. So anytime I'm linking, the link text is only the word scoliosis, it only ever goes to that page. If I write a new article and it's about the symptoms of scoliosis, the anchor text scoliosis symptoms or symptoms of scoliosis will only ever go to that page. But I'm never going to link to scoliosis over here once, scoliosis over here once, because then you're sending conflicting signals. Does that make sense? Okay.
All right. I just want to take a moment to thank our panelists for participating in our Q&A.
Thank you.